Shan, come in on that point with the perspective of a former prosecutor. To Sarah's very important point there, the FBI says this in the filing. The FBI, in a matter of hours, recovered twice as many documents with classification markings as the diligent search, in quotes, that the former president's counsel and other representatives had weeks to perform. It calls into serious question, the Justice Department says, the representation made in the June 3rd certification and cast doubt on the extent of cooperation. The Justice Department essentially saying, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that Team Trump has been lying to us repeatedly.
I don't know if they're going quite that far, John, but from the beginning, it's clear that the lawyers for Trump might be in some jeopardy. And I think this really highlights the jeopardy that they could be in. I mean, it's one thing to have made a letter that represents, the best of my knowledge, I think this is all that we have. But this filing, which is quite comprehensive, really highlights the fact that they are being looked at potentially for obstructing the investigation. And they're in an impossible position. I mean, we've noted that from the beginning. They need to either disavow their client, meaning saying we were misled, or they're going to be considered possibly complicit and have to face questions from the Justice Department. They really need to withdraw. It's an untenable position for them to be in. They can't be effective advocates at this point.
Right, and we know from our reporting now, Christina Bobb, one of Trump's attorneys, signed the letter saying that everything you asked for had been returned, everything you deserved had been returned. Shan, you have been saying for days that you don't think that there's any standing here for a special master. That's the reason this document was filed, to convince a judge the Justice Department is doing due diligence with protecting the sensitivity of documents. The DOJ said this in his filing last night. The former president lacks the standing to seek judicial release or oversight as to presidential records because those records do not belong to him. Do you believe there's any wiggle room here for a judge to say a special master, or should this judge say, never mind, not necessary?
This judge to say, never mind, this is a slam dunk in terms of legal reasoning. Sometimes they refer to the Justice Department as the nation's law firm, and they really showed their legal chops last night. This is a comprehensive, powerful takedown of Trump's meritless legal arguments. It really leaves this judge no wiggle room. I mean, it's a little bit suspect that she's already said she sort of intends to lean in favor of Trump. With this filing, there's just no legal basis for her to rule in his favor. It'll look like a blatantly partisan decision if she does that.
And Sarah, Evan touched on this, but part of the concern inside the Justice Department, or part of the question, is how specific do you want to be in responding to all the things the former president is saying, all the things his allies are saying? Did the FBI plant evidence? All the documents were declassified. The former president says this on his Truth Social site today: terrible, the way the FBI, using the raid during the raid at Mar-A-Lago, threw documents haphazardly all over the floor, perhaps pretending it was me that did it, and then started taking pictures of them, thought they wanted to be kept secret. Lucky declassified, he says at the end. The Justice Department directly addressed that in their filing. Neither counsel nor the custodian asserted that the former president had declassified the documents or asserted any claim or executive privilege. The Justice Department wants the documents back. The government wants to assess the intelligence damage, but part of the calculation inside the Justice Department is, do you let everything he says stand, or do you try to rebut it?
Right, and I think what we have seen from this filing is they very clearly wanted to rebut a lot of it. The picture of those documents that they laid out and I took a photo of, those were documents that they found in the 45 office after having already been assured by Trump's legal team that there were no other classified documents anywhere at Mar-a-Lago. The documents were only in the storage room, and we've given you all of them. And they're saying, look at this bounty we found in the former president's office. They also pointed out in a footnote, there was this whole argument, this big hubbub the Trump folks made about the fact that the former president's passports were taken. In a footnote in their filing, they pointed out, by the way, we had a legitimate reason to seize the passports. Our search warrant covers this. They were jumbled in with a bunch of other documents. So they went pretty far into the deep end in making sure they were trying to set the record straight from their point of view in regards to what the Trump folks have been saying.
It's, again, a very detailed document filed at literally the last minute. Walk us through some of the sensitive issues with inside the Justice Department about what to say in this document, what not to say in this document.
Right. Look, I mean, I think for Merrick Garland, who prefers to not say very much, what they're doing is they're speaking, through the court documents. And one of the things that's very important that, you've got to pay attention to is every communication between the Justice Department, between the prosecutors and Trump's team has made reference to documents with classification markings. That gets around their excuse, which is, well, the president magically declassified everything. Well, what these guys are being asked to do is turn over documents that have classification markings, and as you can look at that photograph again, and you can see that these markings have unmistakable markings that say they're classified. So again, it gets around the excuse that they're making about classification and declassification, because I think the Justice Department is saying we need these documents back because we have to assess, again, for possible damage to human sources, to sources and methods. That's part of the argument that the Justice Department is doing in these court filings, which, again, they very rarely try to say so much, but they have to in this case.
And Shan, help us clear this up. This document is filed in what essentially is a process argument. Should there be a special team appointed to go through the documents in case there are any privilege issues, whether that's executive privilege, attorney-client privilege? I don't want you to go into the weeds of that, which I know you think are silly. But reading it, since the Justice Department did decide to spell out a lot of what it knows and a lot of the specifics of the timeline here, as you read this as a former prosecutor, what does it tell you about the case they are actually trying to build here?
It shows that the case is quite strong in terms of the evidence. I mean, they're really challenging the idea of the appointment of a special master since they already have their own privilege team. They needed to really fight back hard on this. They showed the strength of their case, the evidence, because it was necessary to push back against this judge trying to meddle in a criminal investigation, which would be a very dangerous precedent. So ultimately, John, it's still going to be a tough question of prosecutorial discretion for Garland, whether he wants to enter into this political minefield of putting the department in the historically unprecedented position of prosecuting a former president. But what they're showing so far is very strong evidence that there was a cover-up, that the documents were there, and there is no innocuous explanation for why they were there to begin with.
Right.
One quick last thing, John. One thing we learned that there's another judge who's been overseeing the grand jury. So what the DOJ is saying to this new judge in Florida, hey, we already have two judges involved here. Right. We don't need a third.
Right. So there's a lot to be learned. As you said, Merrick Garland speaks through pretty important documents, not through press conferences as much. Sarah, Evan, Shan, thanks so much. Up next for us, the details in this new DOJ filing. Again, force a Republican choice. Split with Donald Trump or stand with him and defend the indefensible.